Welcome back. This is the second video of the ninth class for social psychological perspectives on health. In the first video, I talked about how social identity affects the way individuals perceive stresses. So in this sense, social identity affects the primary appraisal of the stressor. And then I also talked such effects, such influence would be stronger when the representative member of their in-group can give an example of how they perceive the stresses. And then to the extent that that member is a representative of the in-group, the influence would be stronger. And I also gave one example that social identity affects not only the primary appraisal, but also the secondary appraisal. When the social identity is made salient, even if they don't know how other members perceive stresses, just knowing that they have someone from their in-group will help them to feel that they can cope with the stresses and then leads to lower level of stress. So in this sense, social identity not only affects the primary appraisals of stress, but also the secondary appraisals of stressor. So in this video, I will talk more about how social identity is related to the secondary appraisal. Social identity is a basis for effective social support. So secondary appraisal is the ability to cope with a given stressor. And then depending on how much resources people have to cope with the stressor, people may have lower or higher levels of stress. And the key determinant of secondary appraisal is that a person's perception that they are in a position to benefit from social support. So even if individual's resource to cope with the stressor is limited, if an individual has a lot of social support from others, then they can feel that they can somehow cope with the stressor because they can get help from others. And even if their own time or even if their own ability is limited, if they can utilize the social support from others, then they should be able to feel that they are okay. They can cope with the stressor. So that is why the social support is a key determinant of secondary appraisal. And in chapter 2, we learned this hypothesis 14, when and to the extent that people define themselves in terms of shared social identity, they will both give each other more support and construe the support they receive more positively. And support within a group advances the collective identity they share. So the more they exchange support, they would strengthen the identification with their group. Okay, and then you may also remember the study that looked at how Manchester United fans are more likely to help other Manchester United fans. And this is an example of hypothesis 14. They will give each other more support. So when they feel that they share social identity, they feel that they are more likely to give a support. And also in this chapter, it suggests that people are more likely to feel that they can get support from others. And I guess one thing that is good to keep in mind is that the self-categorization process is potentially fluid, which means that the way people define themselves can easily change. And because the self-categorization process is fluid, The inclination to support others will change as one's social identity is redefined. So at one moment, people may feel that they are not willing to help others, and that may be because the way they categorize themselves and others are different. Basically, they consider themselves and others as us and them, different. But in another moment, if they find a way to categorize us and them together, one category, then they're likely to give more support. So this is a study that looked at this possibility. And this is actually the same paper, the one looked at how Manchester United fans are more likely to help other Manchester United fans. So in this study, participants were told that the study was about football fans in general, and then researchers are interested in positive aspects of being a football fan. So by introducing the study as this way, the researcher induced the categorization of football fans. So instead of categorizing participants as Manchester United fans or Liverpool fans, researchers were successful at inducing the football fans categorization. Okay, and a Confederate who wore a Manchester United shirt or Liverpool shirt or plain shirt tripped and fell in front of participants. And this table indicates how many participants helped the Confederate who wore either of the shirt. And as you can see, okay, let's look at the Manchester United fan shirt first. So because participants now categorize themselves as a football fan, people who wore Manchester United shirt is also a football fan. So they should consider this poor individual who tripped and fell as a member of the same group. So in-group member. And because of this categorization process, 8 participants actually helped the Confederate, while only 2 participants did not help. And also, when the Confederate wore a Liverpool shirt, because participants are now categorized as a football fans, and then because participants also consider this Confederate as a football fan, participants are more likely to help the Confederate. So 7 participants helped the Confederate, while only 3 participants helped the Confederate. However, when the Confederate was wearing a plain plain shirt, only 2 participants helped the Confederate, while 7 participants did not help the Confederate. So as you can see, when participants are induced to categorize themselves as a football fan, and when they perceive that another football fan tripped and fell in front of them, they were more likely to give support. But when non-football fan tripped and fell in front of them, they did not help the Confederate. So making a football fan category salient did not make participants being kind in general. Instead, that made participants specifically being kind to the same category people, the different other football fans. So as I explained, fewer people helped people in the plain shirt. So fewer people helped in the plain shirt condition, and the salient football fan identity facilitates support among people with a shared identity. So So this study demonstrates that very trivial very small manipulation, like how you introduce the study, actually change how people categorize themselves. And such categorization changed how much likely that they would help. And even it determines who they will help. Okay. So I think this study really tells that how much the self-categorization process is fluid and how much the self-categorization process affects the way we perceive others and then how we help others. And not only how much we are likely to give support, but social identification and social support actually reduce our own stress. Social support as a mediator between social identification and well-being. So as I have said before, like a few lectures back, I said that the social support in general is not really related to the levels of stress, and especially received social support is not related to levels of stress, but perceived social support, the perception that they are supported is related to reduced stress. So social identification protects people from stress in part because it puts them and makes them feel that they are in a position not just to receive, but to benefit from social support. So social identification is positively related to both received social support and perceived social support. The more strongly they identify with their group, the more likely that they feel that they are receiving a lot of social support, and but also they perceive that they are supported by the members of their group. And not the reception of social support, but the perception of social support, perception of being supported is related to reduced stress. And that is also related to increased well-being. And there is a study showing that, showing how stress among patients recovering from heart surgery in an Oslo clinic is related to a sense of sharing social identity with their family and friends. So in this study, they first measured sense of sharing social identity with their family and friends. So in other words, how much they feel that they belong to same group with their families and their friends. And this sense was positively related to the amount of support they perceived themselves as receiving while in hospital. So I think this is consistent with this model. So the stronger they feel that they have identification with the group, they feel that they receive more support, and then they feel that they receive more support, and they feel that they are supported. And this perception doesn't make them see the world rosy from the rosy tinted, rosy colored glasses, but it specifically increased life satisfaction in general and stress. But it wasn't related to like self-esteem or satisfaction with the environment. So although maybe they had some complaint about the environment at the hospital, of course they have, some inconvenience at the hospital, but even though they were not fully satisfied with their environment at the hospital just because they feel that they are supported by well, not by, but just because they feel that they are supported by others, actually increased their life satisfaction in general and reduced the stress that they experienced. And this is just one example of how social identification is related to passive social support and well-being or stress. But different contexts also support the relationship between social identification and stress. For example, work-based social identifications and stress. So if you are interested in how work-based social identification is related to stress, maybe you want to check this paper. And also both identification with work teams and with an organization as a whole predicted stress, and the former was a stronger predictor. So in terms of stress experiences, identification with people at work was a stronger predictor of stress compared to the identification with the company or the organization. Okay, so two things to keep in mind. Social identification and social support are bidirectional. So people, if they feel that they are supported by others, maybe that perception will strengthen the social identification. But still, social identity or social identification may come first. So if they identify with a particular group, then they are more likely to perceive the support that comes from that group as positive. Okay. And then perceiving the social support positive would strengthen the social identification, but you first need to establish a strong identification with the group. Otherwise, even if you receive social support, you may perceive it as not so positive. And then because you don't perceive those social support as positive, you would not develop strong identification with the group. And providers and recipients, another thing to keep in mind is that the providers and the recipients of support do not always act in terms of same social identities. So here's an example. For example, Germans may help Greeks as Europeans. So because Germans categorize themselves and Greeks as members of Europeans, Germans were more likely to give support to Greeks. However, Greeks receive the support as Greeks. So Greeks may not categorize themselves and Germans as Europeans, and thus Greeks may not perceive the support from Germans as positive. And Greeks would be even suspicious of the motives behind it. So in this case, the support provided by Germans would not benefit Greeks as it could have been, as much as it could have been. And a bit different example is that therapists who are seen to be honest, respectful, warm, interested, and open tend to achieve better therapeutic outcomes. And these attributes are the ones people usually see in in-group members. So if therapists can develop a sense of shared social identity with the clients, then the outcome of the therapeutic outcomes would be much better. And this is because patients or clients can perceive therapist as an in-group member, and because of that perception, the support therapist provides to the clients would be perceived as more positive, and then that would lead to better health outcomes. So social identity can transform the experience of stress. So this is like a kind of extended model of the transaction model of stress. So when the potential stressor is present, people would categorize themselves as an individual or as a group member. And then if they categorize themselves as an individual, they have to think stressor as like, is this a threat to me? And then they also have to ask, can I cope with the threat? Right? But if they categorize themselves as a group member, then the question would be something like this. Is this a threat to us? And then can we cope with the threat? And then the red arrows indicate indicates that that is likely to lead to high stress, and blue arrows indicate that path is likely to lead to low stress. And also the thickness of the arrows indicate the likelihood or that the arrows lead to the high or low stress. So the primary appraisal may not be so different regardless of how they categorize themselves as individual or group member. But it would basically influenced by how one perceives the threat or how other in-group members perceive the threat. But how they are likely or how they are like how they would pass, the secondary appraisal would be different based on how they categorize themselves as an individual or as a group member. So if they categorize themselves as an individual, their coping resources would be basically limited to what they have, you know. So that's why they are more likely to say no to the question like, can I cope with the threat? And that would lead to higher stress. But if they categorize themselves as a group member, they have much more opportunities to benefit from social support. And that would make them more likely to lead to low stress and less likely to lead to high stress. Okay. So self-categorization as a group member is a basis for receipt of effective support. And this makes positive secondary appraisal more likely. And of course, this will do it on condition that a group is motivated to perceive stress experience positively. So if the group that individuals belong to is not motivated to perceive stress positively or is motivated to perceive the stress experience negatively, then they would not benefit from that categorization. So of course, it is important that individuals belong to the group that is motivated to perceive stress experience positively. But if that's given, then people are more likely to experience low stress. Okay, so integrated social identity model of stress. So this specifies the way how people of different groups respond to stressors differently. And in this model, considers two factors: groups are permeable, the permeability of the group, and the stability of the status. And then we have known that low social identifiers tend to see their group more permeable. So this table, you can see that level of identification, whether the level of identification is low or high, and then low identifiers tend to see their group as permeable. And if they perceive their group as permeable, then they are more likely to leave the group. and then instead join high, and also they are more likely to join high status group. And the preferred coping strategy would be individual avoidance. So basically, they just leave or escape from stressor. And then because they do not identify with a group, they are less likely to receive social support. When low identifiers perceive the group as impermeable, then they are likely to perceive the status, the stability of their status is secure. So they are likely to perceive that it's not possible to change. And in that case, they would use social creativity strategy. So we have learned that this in the chapter of social status and this advantage and disadvantage. I guess it was chapter 3. So they are likely to change meaning of identity, or they are likely to find a group that they can feel better, or they would change comparison dimensions. So they try to find the dimensions that they can feel good. And then they are likely to deny the stressor. And then such denial of stressors would lead to reduced effects of stressor, but in long term, it could give even bigger stressor because the stressor is not removed. And then that would the stressors may end up bring about even bigger problems. And if in the case of high identifiers, they are more likely to perceive the group as impermeable. So because they strongly identify with the group, they feel that they cannot really leave the group. And then when they perceive the group as impermeable, they are likely to perceive their status as insecure. So they see that they can change the situation, they can change the social reality. And thus they are more likely to engage in social competition, and then they will take action such as to engage in conflict, open hostility, or antagonism. And this will lead to collective resistance, and they are likely to challenge and attempt to remove stressor. So they will try to basically remove stressor so that they do not need to experience stress anymore. Okay, so this is kind of summary of how people may perceive and then cope with a stressor. So basically, this is, I think we have already seen in the previous lectures. Okay. So conclusion of the chapter. Stress is not primarily a problem of biology, physiology, or personality. It is not simply a problem of culture, context, or environment. So you cannot determine how stress would affect people, individuals' health badly or not. So you cannot really rely on biomedical, dispositional, or situational models of stress. And that is because stress responses are determined by how people apply stresses and how they may cope with the stresses. And furthermore, people's appraisals vary as a function of groups they belong to and the sense of identities that groups provide. So if they belong to groups that are motivated to perceive stress experiences positively, then that individuals would also perceive the stresses as positively, and then they are more likely to feel that they can cope with the stressor, and thus they will feel less stress. So stress could deteriorate our health, or we could change them by interpreting, or challenging them. And this will make a stress process positive experience, or if they cannot reinterpret reinterpret the stress or cannot challenge the stresses, then the stress process would be negative experience. So to summarize, if people can categorize themselves as a member of a good group in a sense that is motivated to perceive the stressor positively, and also a group that provide a lot of social support to each other, then people are likely to appraise the stressors as positively, or they would feel that they can successfully cope with the stress, and that would lead to less stress, or even perceive the stress as an opportunity for their personal growth. Okay, so no stress is same for everyone. Each stress would be different for each individual, and how each individual would perceive the stressor would be determined by how they categorize themselves. In which groups, in terms of which groups they categorize themselves, in terms of which groups they define themselves, would determine how they appraise and how they face the situations, that how they would how they would confront the situation, and then that would change their stress experience, maybe positively or negatively. Okay, this conclude the chapter. Well, which chapter was this? Sorry, chapter 5, stress. And in the next class, we will start studying chapter 8, I guess, the chapter on depression. Okay, thank you very much.